Hello, everyone, and welcome to our webinar, Working with Cafe Youth Leaders Virtually. So happy you're here. So happy to see everyone in the chat. This webinar is actually part 2 of a series. If you missed part 1, Constructing a Communications Hub, Virtual Planning Meeting Room for Youth Leaders, you are now able to view it on the Teen Science Cafe Network YouTube channel. Part 1 was a tutorial on how to use Google Slides to create a communications hub, a virtual planning meeting room for your youth leaders, an overview of apps used within the space, and a demonstration of how those app icons used within the space link both to other functions and applications that can be used by teens and cafe leadership to communicate. We had a lot of fun creating our own Bitmojis and adding them to our virtual planning meeting room. Today, we will be talking about and demonstrating how we use the virtual planning meeting room in action with our teen leaders. We'll delve more in depth to explore how the Academy of Science St. Louis Teen Cafe Leadership Council is organized, cover our expectations with our teen leaders, and how we handle conveying and tracking of those expectations. We'll look at committees, types of meetings, office hours for those teens, and other events we host for our teen leaders as virtual team building experiences throughout the year. Thank you again to the Teen Science Cafe Network for inviting us to lead these webinars. We really appreciate being able to share what we have created and continue to use with our teen leaders during these pandemic times. And hello again, my name is Natalie Bachman, and along with my colleague Rose Jansen, who is also on today, we are the adult leaders with the Academy of Science St. Louis STEM Teens Leadership Council. As adult leaders, we come from different backgrounds. So first, I would like to tell you a little bit about the Academy of Science St. Louis and who we are as an organization, and share a little bit of background information on our STEM Teens Leadership Council, who also serve as our Teen Science Cafe leaders. The Academy of Science St. Louis is one of the nation's oldest science academies, founded in 1856, with a long-standing mission to connect science and the community and inspire the next generation of scientists and science advocates. We do this by hosting a variety of free and/or low-cost science and tech programs, now virtual, throughout the year, such as Teen Science Cafes, the Junior Academy of Science and its STEM Teens Leadership Council, virtual public science talks and tours, and the Regional Academy of Science St. Louis Science Fair, being held virtually this year as an e-fair and its honors division. Like many other Teen Science Cafe programs, this year began very differently, right? Earlier in the year, as we began to go virtual, we were thinking of ways we could connect online that would offer an engaging, simple, and seamless experience with our teen leaders, and how we could share the material they would need throughout the year without sending yet another email. With a lot of research on classroom teachers who are creating virtual classrooms for their students, we were able to modify their ideas and develop a virtual planning meeting room for youth leaders. We'll kick off this webinar with some slides about our STEM Teens Leadership Council and how it is organized. And then we will give a tour of our virtual planning meeting room that you can see here. And this is our virtual planning meeting room. This webinar is being recorded and will be posted to view later, but feel free to add any questions you might have in the chat, and either myself or Rose will be able to answer them. I do plan to go through the entire webinar first, and then we will be able to go back and answer any questions. After the webinar, I will also share my contact information, so if you have any questions outside of this webinar, you can contact me directly. All right, so let's get started. Let's start with a little information about our STEM Teens Leadership Council and what responsibilities we ask of our teen leaders. The first one is attendance. Our STEM Teens Leadership Council members are required to attend at least 4 cafes, 5 youth leadership team meetings, and 3 dry run presentations throughout the year. Teens should expect to contribute 5 to 10 hours per month. We also ask teens to remember that as a current STEM Teens Leadership Council member, they are not guaranteed a spot in subsequent years. Decisions on acceptance in subsequent years are based on participation during the current year. I do keep track of teen leader attendance, but teens are also able to keep track of their attendance using an attendance sheet that is available to them in the teen leader shared Google Drive, which I will share with you a bit later. We also have different committees. Our youth leaders serve on committees. At each individual planning meeting, they are allowed to choose on which committee they would like to serve. So, committee members are somewhat fluid, as youth may opt to change their committee assignment from meeting to meeting, though most tend to stick with their original choice. The committee choices we have are the speaker committee, social media and marketing committee, welcoming committee, and diversity and inclusion, and our girls can STEM committee. And let's go over a little bit more about committees. Here's our speaker committee. Teens on the speaker committee are responsible for devising a plan on how to best introduce cafe speakers, signing up for speaker roles, and practicing with other youth leaders who also have speaking roles, creating new opening and closing comments for online teen science cafes, helping to create introductory and closing slides for the cafes, and creating a special thank you for the presenter or presenters. For example, an online thank you card and or a video or whatever else they might think up. We have been using punchbowl.com to send out virtual thank you cards to our presenters. The next committee is Social Media and Marketing Committee. Teens serving on the Social Media and Marketing Committee are responsible for helping to answer the question, how can we get the word out, both in person and online, about upcoming cafes? And using canva.com, teens on this committee create social media posts and cafe announcements that can be shared in the teens' online or in-person classes at school amongst their peers and or extracurricular groups and or within their local communities. The Welcoming Committee. Teens on the Welcoming Committee are responsible for creating an online icebreaker, if possible, themed to the cafe topic, developing and writing instructions to introduce the icebreaker, leading the icebreaker activity at the cafe, and also creating sample questions for the cafe to be used to jumpstart or break the ice at a cafe's Q&A session if needed, just in case we do not have any questions from attendees or cafe attendees are initially reluctant to answer their questions, to ask their questions rather. And the Diversity and Inclusion and Girls Can STEM Committee. This committee is responsible for generating ideas to answer questions like, how can we make virtual teen science cafes more accessible to other teens? This committee might work with the social media committee to come up with different ideas. How can we branch out to teens from different communities, low income communities, underrepresented communities? And how can we work to create an inclusive community within the teen science cafes for other teens? Opportunities to include information such as website links and or other resources on girls in STEM that might be related to a particular cafe topic or cafe career area. And they also might suggest or develop other opportunities for teens that highlight diversity and inclusion issues in STEM. And now let's talk about the different types of meetings. So we have planning meetings, dry runs, rehearsals, and teen science cafes. Let's talk about planning meetings. Everyone is probably familiar with planning meetings. Our basic structure for these meetings is to first kick off with an icebreaker activity, and then we spend some time going over any updates that need to be announced. We then discuss our last cafe and go over the pros and cons, things we did well, things we can improve. We chat about our upcoming cafe, and then the remainder of the meeting is designated for committee meetings in breakout rooms with teens planning and developing their committee's respective portions of the upcoming cafe. Up next is the dry run. We are also probably familiar with dry runs, and we try to work our virtual dry runs the same as our in-person dry runs. The speaker gives their cafe presentation and goes over the activity materials and instructions and road tests the activity with our youth leaders, with some time for verbal feedback from the teens. We also ask teens who attend the dry runs to fill out a Google form with their written feedback so that we can then summarize the feedback responses and give any remaining feedback to the presenter if needed. In order for a teen's attendance at the dry run to count towards the required hours as a youth leader, teens must fill out and turn in the dry run feedback form. The form is required to be submitted within 2 hours after the dry run. This just helps to ensure that the teens actively and critically think about the upcoming cafe and turn in their feedback forms in a timely manner so that we can get back to the presenter as soon as possible with any suggested revisions. Cafe rehearsals. Cafe rehearsals are new to our virtual cafes, and I believe they help us a lot. Since we want the teens to lead the cafe without the adult leader saying, okay, now it's Rose's turn to speak. Okay, now it's Lewis's turn to introduce the speaker. It helps if we do a quick run through of speaker and admin roles before the cafe so teens are familiar with when they are speaking or showing slides, who are they introducing, screen sharing, all of those things. I'll mention more about teen admin roles and speaker roles and what that entails a bit later. Teens will practice sharing their slides on the screen, saying their speaker parts, introducing the next teen who will be speaking. That all happens at the rehearsal. And then, of course, teen science cafes, right? The main event. We do ask that any teen who signs up to be a speaker or an admin at a cafe logs on to the virtual cafe 1 hour prior to the cafe start time to make sure we have all of our teen speakers and admins who have roles to play at the cafe to answer any questions, work out any potential technical difficulties. And in case we do have someone who is no longer available and I need to move parts around, that I have time to make those revisions to the cafe and make any understudy teens cafe co-hosts. We might also go over any updates that arose out of the cafe rehearsal or dry run or anything like that. And now let's talk about roles at teen science cafes. The first up is speaker roles, especially for virtual cafes. Because we have a large speaker committee and not always a lot of speaker roles, I do ask that everyone who is interested in being a speaker sign up using a Google form. If they sign up, they need to make sure that they are available for both the rehearsal and the cafe. And again, they are asked to log on to Zoom 1 hour before the cafe starts to make sure all roles are covered. We do let them know that not all members of the speaker committee will be chosen for a role at an upcoming cafe. Once the form closes, we add the names to a random name picker, and those that are chosen will be speakers for the cafe. Once speaker roles are filled, the random name picker will choose an understudy for each of the speaker roles. The understudy role is a teen leader who prepares for a speaker role and is prepared to speak as a replacement on short notice in case the teen speaker for whom they are an understudy is unable to make the cafe. Understudies are also responsible for all speaker responsibilities, being available for the rehearsal and the cafe, and logging on 1 hour before the cafe begins. And admins. Cafe admins have also been a new addition to our virtual teen science cafes. Here is what a teen leader admin is responsible for. Logging on 1 hour before the cafe to make sure that they have access to the cafe and that all tech works. Adult leaders will then add admins as co-hosts for the cafe. Cafe admins are responsible for checking the registration list and admitting attendees to the cafe who are in the waiting room. They monitor attendees throughout the duration of the cafe, whether that's turning off audio or video if needed. They monitor the chat as well. They add any needed instructional activity and or other links such as pre and post cafe survey links to the chat box for attendee access. Admins also need to sign up using a Google form if they are interested in an admin role. And prior to cafe start time, I will share a shared Google Doc with an admin teams that contains the information that they need for the cafe, links to surveys, activity documents, website links, and any link that a cafe attendee might need during the cafe. And other events for our teen leaders. The first one is office hours. As an adult leader, I try to be available to the teens, so this year I have also set up virtual office hours for our teen leaders. I set up these office hours through Zoom for 2 hours every Monday. During these hours, I'm here at my desk on Zoom, and if a teen decides to come by and ask me a question or questions, that's great. It is also a way for teens to set aside time outside of planning meetings to work on things for an upcoming cafe alongside other teen leaders. Or if they just want to log on and get things done, but have the accountability of logging on, they're welcome to do that as well. The next one is team building experiences with our teen leaders. Since we are virtual and very different in terms of how the teens are able to connect with one another, we believe it's important to schedule teen leader time, a time where we, adult leaders, plan a meeting or an event that is just for teen leaders. During these teen leader events, we like to plan different leadership activities where the teens can work together in groups to better get to know one another and still make those impactful connections while we are virtual. Some examples of what we have done include small group virtual escape rooms and creating a virtual vision board party. At our planning meetings, we will always try to begin with an icebreaker so that teens can still get to know one another virtually. And this also provides them with opportunities to preview some examples of the types of virtual icebreaker activities that they could potentially use for an upcoming cafe. And with all of that said, how do we use the virtual planning meeting room with our teens? Overall, those are the main components of how our STEM Teens Leadership Council is structured and how we have gone virtual. But how does all of this work with the virtual planning meeting room? If you are just joining us and you are not able, um, we were not able to view part one of this webinar series, this right here is our virtual planning meeting room. This has been the hub that we have been using with our teen leaders so that teens have all of the materials they need for cafe planning. All of this was created Google Slides. If you are unfamiliar with Google Slides, it's basically an online version of PowerPoint. Let's open it now. This virtual hub is continuously updated with new links and materials that are relevant for our teens and cafe planning. Don't forget, if you need the information on how to add icons and links to the virtual planning meeting room, check out part one of the webinar series, Constructing a Communications Hub, Virtual Planning Meeting Room for Youth Leaders. And thank you to Rose adding all those links in the chat. Perfect. All of the icons in the virtual planning meeting room are live links. So you can click on any of the icons here and they will send you somewhere. Now we're going to take an in-depth tour of our virtual planning meeting room so you can see how we have our virtual meeting room set up and how it works with our teen leaders. Let's get started. First up is a memo. There's always a small memo or an announcement from me for the teen leaders to read over. There might be a call to action or a reminder for the teens. For example, this announcement still says, don't forget to RSVP to upcoming meetings. Our next meeting is, and then they click here to RSVP. So this is a live link and it sends us to Sign Up Genius. We do ask that all teens RSVP to all meetings, dry runs, rehearsals, and cafes. And once again, we use Sign Up Genius to do that. Close out of that. And next is the notebook here. If you choose to create your own virtual planning meeting room, I highly suggest that you have one icon in the meeting room that is designated for instructions on how to use the virtual planning meeting room. That way, if any teens or new teens need reminders that they have a place to go and review if needed. We went over all of this information during our first orientation meeting in September, back in September with our teen leaders. And for example, this instruction slide says, "Welcome to our virtual planning meeting room. This will be a space where you can come and visit anytime. Feel free to save the link and have it handy for easy access. It will be filled with resources you will need throughout the year. Each of the icons in the meeting room means something. You can click on these icons to reach the different resources. For example, you will need the icons to access important documents, meeting schedules, rules and guidelines and expectations, access to dry run forms, and more fun. I always like to add fun to these virtual planning meeting rooms. Also here, anytime you click on the house image, it will send you back to the main planning meeting room. So if they click on the house, sends them back to the main room. Up next is the calendar icon. And here's our team leader calendar. Let's click on it now. It is constantly being updated, which is why the Google Doc format seemed to work for us the best. This is a list of all of our upcoming events, such as meetings, dry runs, rehearsals, everything. Teens can view here to see what's next. Teens are also able to view and see upcoming calendar events and click on the link to RSVP to that event. Once they RSVP through the Sign Up Genius page, they will receive a confirmation email with a Zoom link and any other information they might need for that particular event or meeting. And all of that information is here. We'll close out of that. And up next is the Google Forms icon, which is right here. This is for dry runs. If we have an upcoming dry run, the teens can click on the Google Form icon to access the dry run feedback Google form that is due 2 hours after the dry run. For example, they can read about the dry run here, and then they click on the logo, sends them to, for example, our February dry run feedback form. They fill it out. It's due 2 hours after the dry run. Once again, click on the house, go back to the virtual planning meeting room. Up next is the Teen Leader Document Drive. This logo here is a Google Drive logo. Let's click on it. We have a shared Google Drive with our teens, and they have access to the shared folder here. Here is where teens can find all of the documents needed for anything Teen Science Cafe related. For example, here's a folder for our February Teen Science Cafe, our most recent cafe. Click on it. And there are specific folders for admins, speakers, cafe activity, icebreaker. If we click on the icebreaker, the teens have all the information that they need here. Our teens created a would you rather activity icebreaker, turn your cameras on or off edition. And for example, the admin folder, there's the Google Doc that I mentioned earlier, and then they have access to everything that they might need to add to the chat during the actual cafe. And that is the Teen Leader Document Drive. Up next is the Clipboard right here. The Clipboard contains committee responsibilities. So teens can click here if they need any reminders on what their committee is responsible for and any passcodes that are needed for that particular committee. For example, our speaker committee, if we click on it, there's all of the information that the speaker committee needs. Then they click here to go back to the committees. And also, for example, our social media committee needs the login and password to Canva to create social media images, and then they can find their login information under the social media committee. And then once again, we click on the house to go back to the virtual planning meeting room. And up next is the Zoom logo. Here we have Zoom rules and etiquette from our first virtual planning meeting. We keep it updated if any new rules come up. Here are some Zoom rules our teens came up with. For example, we have be on time, participation, be patient, most important one, right? Especially as we go through this online virtual journey together. Chat responsibly and please be respectful. If the teens add any notes or anything else they would like to add, they can share them by submitting their notes on this link on the slide here. And this just opens up to a Jamboard. Once again, click on the house, sends us back to the virtual planning meeting room. The sticky note right here that says jams, if you click on the sticky note, it will take you to a Jamboard. So let us know in the chat, are you familiar with Jamboards? Do you use them? Has anybody used a Jamboard before? So it is another free Google Chrome extension that you can use with your teens. Perfect. I see lots of yeses. Perfect. We have a lot of fun with that. I think this can be a fun way for us to interact with each other online. I update the Jamboard with new discussion questions, and I encourage the teens to write on the Jamboard. For example, this was a question, what do you think makes a good leader? And we have some responses here. I mentioned to our teens that they are teen leaders, and that means that I expect virtual responsibility from everyone. I ask them to be courteous as to what they say online. And perfect. I see lots of yeses for the Jamboard. Awesome. So glad to see it. This logo right here is the Slack logo. And what is Slack? So if you're unfamiliar with Slack, it is a communication messaging platform for those who work on team projects. Slack is a way for us to communicate online, virtually outside of planning meetings. We are able to create different channels for the different committees to communicate in and continue discussions outside of planning meetings. It also helps me to quickly add meeting reminders, Zoom links, and information about other opportunities if our team leaders need them. So if they need a reminder of what our Slack URL is, it's also here. And we're going to click up here to go back to the main meeting room. And here is the YouTube logo. Since we record all of our meetings, I upload important meeting notes and clips to YouTube. We also record dry runs and rehearsals for team leaders to review. If a team leader needs to duck out of a planning meeting, dry run, or rehearsal early, or has other responsibilities that evening that require that they log in late, they can review what they've missed here. We've created a private YouTube playlist for our team leaders and is only available with the link in the virtual planning meeting room. So we click on the YouTube logo, and here is our team video playlist. We've got planning meetings, rehearsals, dry runs, all of that is here on a private playlist. And of course, the most fun part, right? I like to add different fun surprises to the virtual planning meeting room. You can get really creative with it, and I have a lot of fun with it. For example, if you click on the coffee cup here, it sends the teens to a virtual snack table, which is fun because if we were in person, we would have snacks at our meetings and everything like that. So I encourage the teens, even though we are virtual, to bring their own snacks to meetings and still have fun. And also click on the house to go back. If you click on the Academy of Science logo here, sends to the Academy of Science website that they can see here. And I also like to share a little bit of information about myself. You know, since we're virtual, I like to share. I have a lot of pets, so I share and show off my pets a lot. Right here is Luna. And if you click on Luna, it just takes to a fun video of us dancing together, which is just something fun to share as a little surprise. And you can also change up the links and things like that. And with all of that said, that is about the grand tour of our virtual planning meeting room. And I would like to now open it up for discussion or any questions you might have. Let's see. All right. So I see there's two groups here. One is in the Q&A. Christine, do you have to comply with any requirements regarding number of adults and number of breakouts during your team leader planning meetings? Let's see. What I try to do is I guess not necessarily a requirement, but I try to, once we do the breakout rooms, is both Rose and I at our planning meetings. And once we go into breakout rooms, I try to go to each individual group within the cafe or within the planning meeting. Let's see. And also, is there a role for the team leaders in editing or maintaining the virtual planning meeting room? Oh, yes. Okay, so we handle everything as adult leaders. We handle everything with the planning meeting room. So this was all set up by adult leaders, just given to them, just given to the teen leaders to access. Therefore, nothing gets edited out or deleted if we needed it to, right? But they do have access to the shared Google Drive, and everybody has editing access there. I hope that answers your question. How large is your teen leader group? We have 63 teen leaders, and we try to. We're also going to have a lot of teen leaders drop off because they're seniors this year, so we also try to do that as well, to think about that. Can you share your icebreaker ideas and virtual escape room ideas as well? Yeah, so I'm gonna be honest, a lot of the ideas that we've been getting now come from website Teachers Pay Teachers. Um, that's a really fun website to look at to get some information for a lot of free icebreaker ideas where you can search for your age group that you're working with, icebreaker ideas. They might be free or low cost, and then you can easily download them. That's what I've been using a lot. The last icebreaker we did was in small groups. We did show and tell, which was fun virtually, right? So I got to show off my pets again, as I mentioned, and we had a lot of teens share some cool information about themselves. And the virtual escape room is actually a Sleepy Hollow themed virtual escape room, also from Teachers Pay Teachers. And it was a really cool experience where I just sat here and the teens had to tell me where to go within it was kind of like a VR experience too, on screen. Let's see. Okay, how many participants do you have attended from the cafes? That also varies, right? I think our last cafe might have had 60 altogether. I think that sounds right, Rose. Correct me if I'm wrong. um, how do you manage? Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Rose.
Nope, that's right.
Okay.
I didn't have anything. We had about 60.
All right, sounds good. I think it varies. And then how do you manage activities? I also think that depends on the activity itself, along with the presenter, as far as what the activity is. But how we worked our last activity is we had teen leaders sign up to be facilitators at during the small breakout rooms for the activity. So we had 2 teens per breakout room that knew what the activity was, could help any attendees if needed. Um, they had all of the materials that they need. They were prepped beforehand, all of that stuff. So then they were able to, not only was the presenter able to describe the activity first, but then teen leaders went in each breakout room to go over the activity again, see if anybody needed help, all of that stuff. Hope that answers your question too. And
And then
then,
we
oh,
often use dry runs for, depending, again, like Natalie said, depending on the activity. So we'll use the dry runs and make our youth leaders aware that at the dry runs, we'll be demonstrating the activity. And so those students that have an interest in acting as facilitators at the actual cafes should pay close attention at the dry run. They'll get a chance to kind of do a little bit of a dress rehearsal for the activity and, assess whether or not they think it's something that they can handle or they would like to do at the actual cafe. And then, as Natalie mentioned, we also have rehearsals. So we have another opportunity then at a rehearsal to go over how that'll work with the teams acting as facilitators in the breakout rooms and going over the activity itself if we need to do that.
do you have a materials list ahead of time that you send out? I think that also depends on the activity and what it is. Um, our last cafe, there was some materials that we did share prior to the cafe through a confirmation email. And then not only did they get the materials sent to them in a confirmation email, but then the teen leaders had access to, for example, our February cafe. Once again, like here's the cafe activity. So the teen leaders had everything available them to share within the chat. Same thing with the admins too. So the admins are responsible for adding any materials that are needed for the cafe, for example, the cafe activity itself, and then adding that to the chat as well.
So, and then just as kind of an aside, we do try to make sure that with any of the interactive virtual activities that we might have or use at cafes, that the teens that are attending aren't going to need anything other than maybe a website URL that they're going to have to link to or use, or paper, because we want we want these cafes to be accessible, to everyone as much as we can possibly do that virtually. So we haven't had a cafe yet where we've had materials that an attendee actually has to gather before they participate in the cafe, other than, maybe a piece of paper, or make sure that they've got the URL. And then again, as Natalie said, our team leaders have all of those materials. So if we have an attendee who doesn't have those materials, the team leader does, and they can either share with the attendee, or they can pop those things up on their shared screen in a breakout room.
And then there's one more question. Let's see. Can you say a little bit more about how your team leaders have adapted and or embraced this virtual planning meeting space? Has their feedback resulted in adaptations you've made? We've actually talked about this yesterday. So I think the next thing that we are going to do is I really need to get feedback from the teens as far as how they access it. But mostly during the beginning, during the beginning when we first started with the virtual planning meeting room in September, maybe there was like half the amount of icons. So it did grow. So the next time we added the YouTube channel, oh, we can, record the meetings. Oh, we can add them to a private YouTube channel. I think the dry run or the dry run form, it's always there. It's always in the same space, so it's easy to access. We also mentioned for the teens for them to save this link, to save it in a bookmark or a tab that they have easy access to. And also the Google Drive as well. It's just an easy link to access. But I think we are going to see more feedback from our teens. How have your experiences been made with accessibility accommodations? That's a great question. Um, let's see. I don't know. Rose, do you have anything to add to that?
We haven't really had any issues as of yet with accessibility accommodations, and we're actually kind of currently uh, looking at that through a grant, and how some of the software or things that we might want to purchase and or use so that our virtual cafes are more accessible to folks that might need accommodations. But um, you know, through today, we have not had any questions from folks, or issues, or requests for various accommodations.
And that's another thing too, is another reason why I set up the office hours is just I want to make sure that I'm available to the team leader. So if something did come up, there's a space to connect.
So I'd be curious to know if anybody else that's on the webinar today has had issues with accessibility, and or how they've handled those issues during this pandemic times, or if they've gone virtual with their cafes and their meetings.
We use a live captioner. Is that through Zoom? Just also curious. Okay. We haven't encountered any issues or requests in any of our virtual programs as of yet. One of our cafe coordinators has a visual impairment and are able to use a screen reader, okay, to moderate the chat in our broadcast. Perfect. Awesome. Thank you for sharing.
And one of the things that we do at our cafes is we do try to have, if there are instructional materials for activities, we try to make sure that we provide that material in different fashions for kids who may learn differently. So, we may have facilitators who allowed give the information. We may do kind of a one-on-one where kids are able to follow along with a facilitator or a cafe presenter. It's also presented as written material. So kids who have different learning styles, we hope have the ability to catch on and learn in the way that best suits, their particular style of learning.